Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is Dawgnation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. There is so much happening around UGA, and we're going to try to do our best to cover it all. It's a major recruiting day on Saturday for Georgia. We'll tell you why that is. There's also something that Kirby Smart said earlier this week that I said I wanted to kind of circle back on. Today is the day on that. I'm going to tell you why one pretty short phrase, not necessarily all that meaningful in the moment, perhaps carries even more meaning than you possibly realize. I think this is today a discussion worth having. We'll do that here coming up in a moment. We also have two great guests on the program today. You know, yesterday I had a chance to record an interview with Jake Fromm just just after finding out that Cobie Young was officially suspended indefinitely. So we'll talk about what that means for the Georgia offense, and we'll bring Terrence Edwards in on the same conversation. He knows the Georgia wide receivers. He knows kind of how that group can step up, and so we'll get some thoughts from Terrence on that. But when it comes to offensive playmakers, how about Kirby Smart calling one of his guys an undeniably, completely verified alpha? Is that what Georgia needs right now on the offensive side of the ball? Some alpha dog type behavior? Well, Kirby Smart says he's got one guy at least that's bringing some of that. We'll give you that on the program today there as well. Fully loaded, ready to go. Glad to have you on board with us as we do. It is Dawgnation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of Dawgnation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is Dawgnation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
The typical cadence of a football calendar is that by the time you get into the season, recruiting oftentimes kind of quiets down just a little bit. You know, the typical tradition is a lot of recruits want to make their commitment announcement kind of just prior to the start of their senior year. That's the idea of, I'm going to focus on my team, focus on maybe trying to win a state championship. I'm going to get the recruiting part over so that I can focus on all of this. And because of that, not every recruit does it that way, and there's nothing that says you have to do it that way, but many recruits do. And so because of that, and because of the expedition of the, recruiting calendar, we now have early signing period in December, whereas it used to be signing day only in February. We've seen the earlier portion of the summer become really the hottest time for recruiting, like June, for instance, first weekend in June, second weekend in June. These are the busiest times of the year oftentimes for that recruiting calendar when the major visits oftentimes take place. And so therefore, because all the action happens in the summer, because a lot of guys like to commit before they start playing their senior years, sometimes it sort of feels like the recruiting process during the season can be a little bit quiet. Now, it's never completely quiet at a place like Georgia. They got a commitment from a four-star running back and a beloved local figure in Usmani Croma last week. There's always going to be some kind of Georgia recruiting news going on, working to flip so-and-so. That's never going to be a conversation that completely goes out of style. But it's still a little quieter, typically speaking, on the recruiting front because of the way in which recruits choose to operate, and also because, let's be honest, when you have actual games to pay attention to, sometimes fans also just sort of turn their attention to that. And so perhaps we're in the midst right now of Georgia fans thinking about, hey, a game against Mississippi State on Saturday where you're kind of hopeful to see Georgia take another step in the right direction to be ready for the big game coming 2 Saturdays from now when Georgia goes to Texas. That's a pretty full meal to eat if you're a UGA fan, so maybe your thought process is sort of solely focused on that. If it is, for a couple of minutes, let me give you a quick reminder that this upcoming Saturday, it is one of the biggest days on the UGA football recruiting calendar for the entire 2025 cycle, despite the fact that it takes place during the season and not, as I said before, during one of the more traditional times where recruiting typically gets a lot of attention for official visits and things like that. The reason why, many of you already know this, the 5-star defensive lineman Elijah Griffin, the guy that we've said now for quite some time, was the most important name for Georgia in this class. Justice Terry, you may say, is almost like a sort of a twin pillar of importance for UGA, but we've identified for a long time that the presence of these elite in-state defensive linemen, this would be the major theme of this class for Georgia, and winning with these guys, for the obvious reasons that makes this important, winning with these guys would be the most crucial storylines to follow as the 2025 cycle plays its way out. So that day is Saturday, Georgia's big chance to impress Elijah Griffin. Now, let's be honest here for a moment. An official visit's always important. The chance to not just sell the program to the player, but official visits means selling the program to the family as well. That's always going to be important. But if you listen closely, if you watch carefully, one of the things you start to notice is that maybe for Griffin on Saturday, there's at least some hope. Is this wishful thinking? We don't know. But there's at least some hope that this is more than just a chance at a good official visit, an official visit that goes well in the way that all official visits seem to go well. There's a chance this could be more on Saturday. There was a hint dropped about that last night. I hope that you're watching Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. I tell you, I'm amazed at how entertaining that show is. I think that Kaylee Manziel's done a great job of coming in as a co-host. Cody Chafin's kind of adding some production heft to that broadcast. It's just a really fun watch. It's an easy watch. They had a great time last night celebrating I mentioned Ousmane Kromah committing to Georgia last Saturday. They did a great job of celebrating that last night. Really, really technically proficient show here right now. But one of the conversations they sort of got into was the Elijah Griffin official visit on Saturday. 5-star defensive lineman, Savannah Christian, one of the big names that's out there. And if you listen to Jeff Sintel talk on the program last night, you get the sense that just maybe this could be, if all goes well, maybe it's more than just an official visit on Saturday. Listen to Jeff Sintel. See if you get what he's putting down here for a moment.
Yeah, first of all, it's his birthday weekend.
Ooh.
He's bringing in all his family for that because he wants to have a good time. He wants to have a great time on his birthday weekend with his loved ones, and he's choosing the Mississippi State game in Athens to do so. It's his birthday weekend, and I really feel like this is one that Georgia has had. They've had its hands on. They've had a firm grip on this recruitment for a while. Like others are trying. Miami is a finalist. USC is a finalist. I got to say, when a young man schedules an official visit for his birthday weekend, and he's already kind of feeling a little bit of the vibe that he doesn't want to take that thing all the way to December, I think a lot of these things bode well for the University of Georgia.
Oh, that was fun at the end. It's his birthday. He already likes Georgia. He's sort of tired of the recruiting process. Does that all kind of come together in magical fashion on Saturday that as the Dawgs are hopefully celebrating another SEC win over Mississippi State, that perhaps they have something else to celebrate there as well, that maybe Elijah Griffin also commits to Georgia during this official visit there on Saturday? Wouldn't that be fun to consider? And wouldn't that be good news for UGA? And perhaps, you kind of want to take this to the sort of the full extent here, for Georgia fans who've been challenged by Kirby Smart to make the environment for Georgia home games as good as it can possibly be. Now, most of you probably feel incentivized to do that simply because Kirby Smart's asked you to. But there's also maybe an extra incentive on this there as well. Elijah Griffin going to be there on Saturday, going to be looking around between the hedges and saying, could I see myself being a part of this program for the next 3 to 4 years? Could I call this place home? The better the atmosphere is, the more likely perhaps Griffin might be to say, you know what, it's my birthday. I'm feeling kind of good about all of this. Let's just go ahead and commit to the G. Saturday could be a pretty special day for Dawg fans, so hopefully they'll do everything they can to make the environment as good as it can be at Sanford Stadium there on Saturday. Now, saying all that, let me switch to this. I told you the other day that I wanted to circle back at some point in time this week on something that Kirby Smart had said the other day. And today is that day. There was a statement that he used, a small phrase that he used that really jumped out at me. And it kind of reminded me of sort of an old story from college football's past. And I have no idea if Kirby Smart even knows this story. I suspect that he probably does. I have a suspicion that he may have been thinking about this. And I think it's just sort of worth us talking about here for a moment. So this weekend, Oklahoma plays Texas, one of the biggest rivalry games every year in college football. For a long time, it's been, kind of the Big 12 game. It goes back to a time in which Oklahoma was the Big 8, Texas was in the Southwest Conference, but now it's in the SEC, so kind of a cool Saturday to have this be the first time this rivalry is played with an SEC banner flying overhead. But either way, Texas-Oklahoma is a very big game. Oklahoma as a program, you'll remember, many of you do if you're my age, that their former legendary great coach was Barry Switzer. Some of you may know Switzer going on to be the Dallas Cowboys coach, won a Super Bowl there. One of the absolute lionized figures in the history of college football. In fact, I believe ESPN.com wrote a story about him this week leading into this Red River rivalry showdown on Saturday, shootout, if you want to call it that, between the Sooners and the Longhorns there on Saturday. Well, Barry Switzer had a lot of success at Oklahoma, and he once talked very candidly about that success. And I could not help but think back to that this week. So one of the things that Switzer said is that when you kind of build up a program like Oklahoma, he's kind of referencing back to the Bud Wilkinson era. Wilkinson was way before my time and way before most of your times there too. The former great Oklahoma coach, longest winning streak in the history of the sport, that belonged to Bud Wilkinson. And so what Barry Switzer said he observed about watching that is that building a program like Wilkinson did at Oklahoma, like Switzer would do in his aftermath, is like building a monster. And he says it's a monster that has to be fed. And if we look around, we kind of feel this, right? It's like the college football programs are so big and they generate so much attention and energy and interest within our communities. Think about how big Georgia football is in the state of Georgia. Frankly, even though the NFL is sort of top dog from the sporting standpoint nationwide and almost worldwide, in our state right here, the Atlanta Falcons, with all due respect, come nowhere close to matching the energy, the intensity that people feel about Georgia football. It's just a monster in a way that nothing else from a sporting standpoint is in our state at all. And Barry Switzer obviously acknowledges, well, that's sort of a good thing to have that kind of program, that kind of prestige, that kind of power. It's also a huge responsibility because what Switzer said, and you can go back and find this quote yourself, what Switzer said is the monster has to be fed. You got to give it championships. You got to give it wins. So all of a sudden now it's sort of like having a pet monster where it's like this monster constantly has to be fed. And think about how, like, to kind of take this analogy all the way through for a moment. Think about how grueling and how tiresome that is. Gosh, there's this huge monster. I got to feed it. I got to keep giving it championships. I got to keep doing this. No days off. Can never take a break from this because the monster's appetite is never fully satisfied. There's always a need to give it more, give it more, give it more. And then what Switzer said is, hey, and if you're not careful, if you don't feed this monster well enough, he's very famous for this quote, if you don't feed this monster well enough, eventually the monster will eat you. And at Oklahoma, Barry Switzer did sort of get eaten up a little bit. And a lot of big coaches create a monster that's so big and powerful, but also hungry for more. And eventually, if that appetite goes, unsatiated, all of a sudden now they're eating the guy that created it. It's a really cool descriptive analogy, and I think a lot of people kind of recognize that as being true the way that Barry Switzer once described it. Now, you may say, what does that have to do with Kirby Smart? Well, this week, when Kirby Smart was talking about something we referenced a moment ago, the idea of, hey, fans being happy and making a bunch of noise and celebrating moments like beating Auburn on Saturday. In the midst of talking about all of that, Smart also used a phrase that sounded an awful lot like what Barry Switzer once said about being careful about the monster that you make. If you don't feed it well enough, eventually that monster turns on you and eventually it devours you. Listen to Kirby Smart this week. See if you noticed that. Here he is from Monday.
I said what I said and stand on what I said, and feel that it could have been better. But, my job is to coach the football team, and I'm going to do the best I can in my power. And I've been in some really good places where, there's times that you create a monster, whether it was when I was at FSU, when I was at Alabama, and you have to appreciate that, and you have to create home field advantages. And, we've had coaches tell us that come here and play that it was the best environment they played in the entire year. But I didn't think that was Saturday. And I don't think I'm the only one that feels that way. But, again, my concern is with Mississippi State, not the other. I trust the people that are in charge of it to help it. I trust our fans.
Kirby Smart says, I've been at places where you create this monster. Possibly just a coincidence. that the phrase that he uses is so similar to the phrase that Barry Switzer, the former Oklahoma coach, was once famous for using. References to Florida State, references to time in Alabama, possibly just a coincidence that Smart doesn't even know what Barry Switzer once said, is not thinking about that when he says that. But boy, the comparisons are at least somewhat eerie, right? Think about how frustrated at times Nick Saban got. People forget this, but at one point in time, Saban was even flirting with the Texas job, because he was a little bit frustrated that he didn't think Alabama fans were appreciative enough of the success they were having. He spoke about this at one point in time. Certainly at Florida State, Jimbo Fisher won a national championship there, was essentially miserable by the end of his tenure. And obviously Florida State fans, after what Bobby Bowden built into the sort of classic monster that Barry Switzer once described, they themselves have also been kind of miserable since then because it's just sort of hard to keep feeding that beast, feeding that monster, the same number of championships and wins it took to sort of build it up in the first place. I think that's really interesting that Kirby Smart would use a phrase like that, knowing what Barry Switzer once said and knowing that some coaches sort of share old tales about that kind of thing with each other. Now, I want you to understand what I'm getting at here for a moment. Later on in today's show, we're going to have Jake Fromm on the show. I recorded with Jake yesterday. Jake knows Kirby pretty well. Kirby was his head coach. Jake was his quarterback. Relationship with coach and quarterback is kind of a close one. So Jake is a good person to ask this to because he has seen what Kirby Smart looks like behind closed doors, privately, away from everybody else. The simple question I'm going to ask Jake Fromm is, given how hardly tightly wound and hard driving Kirby Smart is, given the demands of being a coach in this day and age right now where no matter how complicated the sport becomes, the monster still has to be fed. Given all of that, do you think that Kirby Smart can coach the Georgia Bulldogs for 20 years? Do you think he can make it for another period of time as long as the one that he's already spent on the job? And Jake's going to give you, I think, a pretty interesting answer to that. Now, I'm not saying any of this to sort of like hold this over your head and be like, y'all better appreciate Kirby Smart, you're going to lose him. It's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm saying. But I do think all of us acknowledging, and I'm guilty of this because as a media person, I come on here and rattle pots and pans and fan the flames of hype and things like that. You're guilty of that because we all have an appetite for more. Kirby Smart, if we're being honest, he's also guilty of this too because clearly he likes the benefits that come your way when you're a coach that wins this much. There's a reason he's not coaching at McNeese State, for instance. You'd have a far easier life doing that, but you challenge yourself for the biggest possible job you can get because ultimately it's just attractive to be around something so successful and to do as much as you can to make it successful. But it's also probably a little tiring too. Feeding the monster day in and day out, eventually knowing that if you don't give it enough, wins, championship success, no matter how much you've given it in the past, it's hungry again today. And eventually, if you don't have what it takes to feed that monster, the monster's going to eat you. That's what Barry Switzer once said. Other coaches have found that to be true. Kirby Smart referencing building a monster at a place like Florida State, a place like Alabama, in comparison to what might be happening here at Georgia, where it's 2 national championships, it's a long home winning streak, and yet only beating Auburn by however many points Georgia won by on Saturday, it's okay. It's all right. Not quite what I was hoping for, some Georgia fans might say. Interesting to consider that, and interesting to consider the weight that a guy like Kirby Smart has on his shoulders, given all of the challenge that exists for coaches here right now. Not sure what it means, not sure where it's all going, but certainly every coach is sort of wrestling with how do you feed the monster of a program given the challenges of NIL, given the challenge of transfer portal, given the challenge like what obviously Georgia has to endure this week with the arrest of Cobie Young. How do you keep feeding the monster when the sport's getting more complicated than it's ever gotten before? Kirby Smart's really wrestling with that, like any coach would. And you do kind of wonder, well, how long can all of that wrestling match go on? Jake Fromm will have some interesting thoughts about that later on today. But for now, let's get ready to introduce the show. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is Dawgnation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We're glad you're with us, no matter how you get to us. Video, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 F, podcast, anytime, anywhere, any place. Apple, Spotify, all the major platforms. Glad to have you with us here today. Looking forward to a great show. As I said before, Jake Fromm later on, Terrence Edwards in a couple of minutes. All of it made possible, I should say, by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. And one of the things I'm so proud of on our show, and if you'll allow me to be self-serving for a moment, is how many of our great sponsors have been with us for years and years and years. And Merriweather and Tharp's been with us about as long as anybody has. And I'm really proud of that. Obviously, I think it says something good about us, but also I think it says something really good about Merriweather and Tharp there as well, that after years and years and years of kind of telling a very similar story here, that if you've got questions about the divorce process, Merriweather and Tharp wants to give you accurate, honest answers that come from a generous place about how you can set yourself up for a more successful next season of your life if divorce is the obvious next step for you. We've been saying that for a long time. And for a lot of people in our audience, in fact, I've actually met people who will come up to me and say, yeah, BA, I did not want to get a divorce, but I had to, and Merriweather and Tharp really helped me. And I am thankful to hear that. I am. I'm very, very thankful that an organization like Merriweather and Tharp exists to help people in what could be one of the most traumatic times of need that you'll ever experience as a human being. Whether you're the husband or the wife or whichever party in the situation you are, that's a very traumatic situation. Our friends at Merriweather and Tharp have truly been providing really generous service to folks like that for a very long time. So much so that if you want to go back years ago when we first started this, we would always talk about the work they were doing in the Atlanta area. Obviously, Atlanta's a very big city, so lots of opportunities to help people there. But they became so well known because of what they were doing in the Atlanta area that now it sort of stretches out statewide. The website reflects that. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That means if you're in Peachtree City, if you're in Carrollton, if you're in Athens, if you're in Savannah, if you're places like this, you can connect with Merriweather and Tharp to have the same level of care for a divorce situation that folks in Atlanta have had for a long time. So once again, the same message as it's always been. If you've got questions about the divorce process, Merriweather and Tharp has answers for you. Free initial consultation with one of those attorneys, no matter where you are statewide, online, GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, so when we talk to Terrence Edwards here in a moment, we're going to talk about, hey, what's next for Georgia at wide receiver? A lot of responsibility for that group in light of what's happened for Cobie Young here this week. We'll cover all of that with Terrence here in just a moment. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the doghouse. And obviously, what we saw in recent years for Georgia is in the need to be as explosive in the passing game as you can possibly be, that doesn't always have to come from just wide receivers. Over the course of the last 3 years, as you know, we saw one of the greatest players in Georgia program history, Brock Bowers, play essentially like a wide receiver while he was playing the tight end position. And listen, to say anybody's the next Brock Bowers is kind of an unfair thing to say, of course. But obviously in that style, Georgia, as it looks to kind of find more red zone targets, big body targets, the sort of thing that Cobie Young was good at for as long as Cobie Young is not playing, assuming that he ever does play again for Georgia. Obviously, none of that's known at the moment. The tight end position might be one of those things to go back and take a second look at. And we find ourselves here back on the show talking about something that we've also talked about recently, which is the potential emergence of Lawson Luckie. Going into the Auburn game, we sort of saw that Luckie was kind of a player on the rise in terms of his growing usage, the fact that his stats were increasing there as well. And it seems like some things were happening for Lawson Luckie in a very positive way. Well, here we are now going into the next SEC game for Georgia, Mississippi State on Saturday. And once again, it sort of feels like good things continue to happen for Lawson Luckie. Kirby Smart, having a chance to speak about Luckie earlier this week, really gave some, I think, interesting praise for him, both in terms of what he's doing on the field, but also the leadership that he's showing in that room there as well. This is really strong stuff from Kirby Smart. And in his description of Lawson Luckie is the kind of thing that's going to raise some eyebrows in a very good way for many Georgia fans. This is Kirby on Luckie from earlier this week.
He has a little nastiness to him. He's a little bit of one of those guys that he doesn't have the anxiety maybe of others. He's his uncle's played here. He grew up playing football his whole life. He doesn't get all pouty if a coach gets on him. He's not afraid to stand up for what he believes in. he's a little bit of an alpha. I mean, he's not afraid to compete and do things. Now, I still think he can improve on a lot of things, especially inline blocking and some stuff. But he's a competitor, man. And you throw the ball near him, he's going to try to go get it. So I have a lot of respect for his toughness.
Boy, I love to hear that. And if that's all true, we certainly believe that it is, all of that growth and development for Luckie comes at a really good time, because you would presume that he is capable of doing a lot of the things that Cobie Young had been doing very well for Georgia there as well. The idea that this is your alpha, this is a guy who can be nasty, but also can kind of go get the football, still working on being maybe a better, as Kirby Smart describes it, inline blocker, but a guy that just has that knack for going and getting the football. Many of us saw that from him at Norcross High School, and we've seen confirmation of that on the field thus far this year too. And as far as those like leadership credentials go, we saw Luckie put that on display publicly this week there as well, invited to speak to the media. And when it comes to his position group, the tight end position, he didn't hold back in saying that, hey, all the guys in that room, himself and Oscar Delp and the others, Ben Jurasik, guys like, Colton Heinrich waiting the wings and, the other names that are in there, they're all kind of hoping and expecting themselves to achieve a higher standard as the year goes on. Kirby praises Luckie's leadership. It's statements like this that would seemingly make that true.
I think that we would love a little more production from each other, just because, we're playing great effort, but, we're not frustrated. Just the catches are going to come, and we know that. We just got to keep doing our job, going harder in practice, and that's one of the biggest improvements we've been talking about with Coach Hartley is we've just got to practice better. That's the biggest thing we've got to do. But I think we're in a really good spot.
So that's some of that leadership. Is like, hey, listen, we're certainly trying hard. We're giving good effort, but tight end at Georgia, very high standard for achievement. Luckie right there says maybe thus far as a group we're not quite achieving that standard yet, but obviously we're going to hold ourselves to that high standard as the season goes along. And I think it goes without saying that given the playing style of Cobie Young, his absence, I do think puts a bigger spotlight on the tight end position. And perhaps on Saturday, that group will shine even more in a game against Mississippi State. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on Dawgnation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Now, before I shift gears and bring on Terrence Edwards, let me also remind you that while Georgia got the game against Mississippi State on Saturday, we're also thinking 2 Saturdays from now there as well, because since we're not coaches and players, it's okay for us to look ahead a little bit. And we're looking ahead to Dawgnation Invasion. And talking about last minute here to get involved on that. Travel package from our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips. Get you into a hotel there in the Austin area. Limited space for that if you need it. Also, we're about to kind of get capped out on these Dawgnation Invasion T-shirts. We got limited space on that there as well. But the final push to get as many folks on board and as many folks in as we can, that's happening right now. If you're going to Austin, the place to be. The Friday night party before the game, the Saturday night all-inclusive tailgate before the game, all of that happening there in Austin with our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips. Of course, the Dawgnation gang going to be on hand for that there as well. It's dawgnation.com/tailgate for more on that. Dawgnation.com/tailgate. And you can see a lot more on that big event taking place in Austin. If you need a travel package, our friends at Atlanta Sports Trips can help you out with that. If you want to be a part of either the Friday night party or the tailgate, we got you covered on that. Great thing going down. Can't wait to see you for it. Dawgnation.com/tailgate for more on that. We'll see you Dawgnation Invasion in Austin next Saturday, one of the biggest that we've ever done. All right, before we're done, it's Jake Fromm here today. As I told you before, really good stuff coming up with Jake. Also, maybe there's a chance that a brand new Heisman Trophy contender emerges this weekend, perhaps a surprising name. I'll give you more on that in a bit too. But for now, on everything related to Georgia, it's pursuit of, hey, how do you get that offense going now that you're subtracting another wide receiver from the mix? Let's talk about all of that with Terrence Edwards here today on Dawgnation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always happy to have Terrence Edwards here as a part of Dawgnation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. Nobody knows this topic better than he does. As a coach, as a player, as anything in between, he's just locked in on all of this. And obviously, Terrence, by now, everybody's expressed their disappointment. The fact that Georgia's having to talk about another player arrest, we clearly don't like that. And obviously, hope that justice prevails one way or another in the Cobie Young situation. But kind of moving past that and getting on to the football part of it, can we have kind of an honest talk here for a moment? if you're a Georgia receiver who maybe feels like, hey, I haven't been getting enough run, I'm not getting enough time on the field, I'm not getting enough touches, is there something about this that can be galvanizing for that guy to say, not that you're glad this happened to Cobie Young, of course they're not glad that this happened to one of their brothers, air quotes around brothers, but is there something about this of, okay, all of a sudden now I can renew myself, all of a sudden now I can kind of reinvigorate myself because there are touches to be had, there's playing time to be had. How much do you think the other Georgia wide receivers perhaps kind of leaned in a little more this week, knowing that they may now have a bigger opportunity than they otherwise would have had if Cobie Young was not, was still with the team?
Right. I just think, there's always the next man up mentality. I think you go into every practice, every rep, thinking that you're only one play away from being the guy that's on the field. So you have to be locked in at all times. I mean, even if, you're not going to get the game reps that you would like, you just never know what's going to happen in a game of football. So there's a couple guys like Nigel Tugger or, Landon Humphrey that probably have an opportunity to step up and show what they could do. Anthony Evans is another one that's probably the next man up in the receiver rotation. So there's a lot of guys that are probably going to get some opportunities that they probably wouldn't have gotten if this unfortunate incident hadn't happened. So I think every guy has the mindset that they could go and make plays if given the opportunity. Now the opportunity may present itself.
Yeah, I think if we kind of polled this with fans and asked them, hey, who's next? Who do you want to be next? One of the names you just mentioned would probably come up pretty prominently there, and that is Anthony Evans. Evans, obviously an accomplished punt returner for UGA. We've seen flashes from him at the wide receiver position. But, sometimes the transition to like sort of a full-time player or a major part of the offense, sometimes the learning curve on that can be, a little bit steep here and there. What have you seen from Evans, and what do you think that he might need to show coaches more to really get his chance now that there is some playing time to be had?
So I don't know which position that he's focused on for the X receiver, that's to the boundary receiver, or in my mind the Z, that's the field, or one of the slots. So I don't know which position that he's been practicing at, different skill set, size-wise, but he does bring the ability to stretch the field. He is a legit 10-2 guy in track. So I'm just excited to see this young man play. And it's crazy that I play with his uncle in the Canadian Football League. So I've known about him for a while. So it's just ready to see if he could take his game to the next level. And the coaches have to trust. It has to be a trust there that once he get into the trenches, that he's going to get all the adjustments right. He's going to get all the hots right. He's going to get all the sight adjustments correctly. So it's the trust factor, not the ability factor, that may have kept him off the field. I don't know, but he's going to have to be trusted to be put into that role.
So let's get in the weeds here for a minute in a way that I don't typically do. And Terrence, I think you know this. I don't pretend to, I'm not a former coach. I don't pretend to know more about this than I do. But let's talk about the difference between an X receiver and a Z receiver for a moment. My understanding of this is, hey, as you said, the X receiver, that's the boundary side. That's the shorter side of the field, which means it's theoretically an easier throw for the quarterback. But the defense knows that too. So they're putting their best corner typically on that kind of boundary side there as well. Therefore, shorter throw, easier throw, better cornerback. To be a good X, you better be a somewhat big-bodied receiver, have some strength, because you're going to be kind of winning a battle against a good defensive back in kind of a shorter space, a more confined space. Whereas the field side, the wide side of the field, it's a longer throw for the quarterback to make, but there's more green grass to work with. So if you're an athletic guy that can run past people, if you've got the kind of elusiveness to make someone miss, that's sort of a better spot for you, wide side of the field, as a Z receiver. Now, I'm not a coach. You know the positions. You played them. You coach them now. How is that for a description of the difference between, like, say, an X and a Z in your mind?
No, you hit it right on the head. Usually, the X is kind of probably your better receiver. I play X majority of my career at Georgia. So your X receiver is normally your better receiver, the guy who can actually have a release package because the field is shorter. if it's tighter, and the best defender normally goes to the boundary as well. So I'm interested to see who takes that position. I think Cobie Young was a perfect X with his big body, his long arms, his ability to high point, his ability to catch back shoulder. So it's going to be interesting to see who goes to that spot. Dylan Bell has been an X as well, and he's a perfect X with his strength and his catching ability. So it's going to be interesting to see who backs up. I think Dylan Bell at the X position. I think Anthony Edwards have the playing strength and the foot speed to play that position.
Yeah, so that was kind of my next point, because you said this a moment ago, and I think this makes sense to a lot of us based on our knowledge of football, that London Humphrey's is a good football player. He had a really good game against Clemson, for instance, but he doesn't look like what I think of an X-receiver sort of looking like. He looks more like the slot receiver, or kind of the, as we said before, the sort of Z receiver on the wider side of the field. Like I said before, just my sort of knee-jerk reaction, that's the way I sort of see it. Dylan Bell, body type-wise, sort of looks to me like an X, and as you said before, it seems like we have been seeing him play that. So I think what a lot of Georgia fans think is, okay, well, you know, you got Bell who can play there, but you probably need more than just that dude. Ra Thomas was kind of an X body style. Colbie Young was, I think, sort of an X body style. That when you think about the other receivers for Georgia, from a body style standpoint, from a this is a guy who can win those battles against the best corner for the other team standpoint, do you see an obvious candidate to sort of play that position for Georgia, or maybe a possible candidate to kind of join Dylan Bell in that X receiver role for UGA?
I think Anthony Edwards has the frame and the speed and the playing strength to play X. I don't know if he's been playing X or Z or the slot receivers. I don't know what he's been focusing on, but he does, in my opinion, have the body type, the playing style, and the speed to play X.
And then we were talking about Lawson Luckie before you joined us, and I mean, a lot of folks really like a lot of what Luckie's been able to do. Is it too simplistic for me to say, hey, Cobie Young was a good red zone target, Cobie Young was tall. You could throw him the ball, he could kind of go get it, and oftentimes he did. So the guy on the roster that seems to have that skill set as much as anybody right now, maybe that is Lawson Luckie. Obviously, the sport's more complicated than that, but body type, playing style, it sort of seems like Luckie from his spot is capable of doing some of the stuff that Cobie Young was doing. Is that too simplified to sort of say that way?
No, it's not. I think Lawson possesses the receiver type ability for his route running. If you go back and check out the video, because I have worked with Lawson a lot, he has the route running ability of wide receiver. Once we signed Lawson, I went out and said he'll be the best route runner that we have on the team, even with Brock Bowers being there, just a pure route running standpoint. Lawson understands the ability to drop his hips. He understands the ability of acceleration and deceleration out his in and out his brakes, and he has the ability to catch the football. So I would love to see Lawson play some X in the 13 package, and like we did with Brock, and put him on an island with maybe smaller defensive backs or safety, because he does have the route running ability and the ball skills to play X receiver. And
Georgia loves to throw that sort of back shoulder fade. You know, obviously it did not work at the end of the Alabama game, but it has worked Cobie Young prior to that. They connected on a big one on what turned out to probably be the bigger drive of the game for Georgia against Auburn. I mean, I could see Luckie, and I think he caught some of those balls at Norcross. I could see Luckie sort of becoming a little bit of the back shoulder fade target, assuming that Georgia still wants to keep that as a part of the offense, even though Cobie Young's no longer playing.
Yes, I mean, that's something that you have to keep. I mean, you have the old saying is, if you're even, you're leaving. If you then the other, you throw it back shoulder. So I'm just hoping that we get someone, because the back shoulder throw is essentially unstoppable. I mean, I think Aaron Murray is probably the best back shoulder thrower I've seen in the Georgia uniform. And he used to do it, perfectly. So if we could get Carson to find some guys on the back shoulder, I think Dylan Bell still have the skill set to be a guy that really be able to open his hips up and catch back shoulder fade. So that's something that I wish we could continue to work on, because it is a weapon that we can utilize.
let me finish with this. Did you think that Georgia showed offensive improvement last week against Auburn? They scored a touchdown in every quarter. That's one of the things we'd like to have. We said we'd like to have seen, and we did see that. Did you think that Georgia looked better offensively on Saturday? Perhaps a group taking a step in the right direction.
The one thing that I was impressed with, that I felt better about, is the running game. I think we have to really unleash Trevor Etienne. I think he's a special talent for us catching the football and running the football. So I thought, giving him the ball as much as we did was a plus. And to get him going, I think, the running game could be very helpful to the passing game, because if, as a defensive front, if Georgia's just going to pass the ball 90% of the time, you get the players who are pass rushing. Let's get them in an understanding of being able to set the edge, get the defense to not run upfield, and they have to defend the run. Now, I think Trevor is a guy that could do that, and I really appreciated the way he played on Saturday.
To Terrence, great stuff. I always appreciate your insight into all of this. I mean, really, there's nobody who knows this stuff better, because you know these guys personally. You've worked with so many of them, and obviously nobody loves it more than you do when your alma mater goes out there and plays well. We certainly hope that's the case again on Saturday. Thank you so much for your time. For people who want more of you online, Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, and if they want to get some of the training that you've been providing to guys on this Georgia roster here right now, how can they get in touch with you?
Yes, you can reach me on all social media platforms at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I mean, y'all know I like having the former players in the show, and let's have a conversation about Lawson Luckie. And when Terrence so effortlessly slides into, well, when I've been training with Lawson, this is what I've been telling him. Like, that's a pretty credible voice to have as a part of the program. So we're lucky to have it. We've got Jake Fromm coming up there as well. We're lucky to have that too. I told you before. I asked Jake directly. I said, can Kirby Smart do this job for 20 years? And we'll let Jake answer that question himself coming up in a moment. And, it's one of those deals where some jobs in life are just short-term propositions. Like, think about your local high school principal. The old high school principal who's on the same job 20 years, you don't see as much of that anymore. Think about, and I don't want to bring politics into this, but, think about press secretary in the White House. You can be president for 8 years, but nobody's going to be press secretary for 8 years. The typical president runs through a couple of press secretaries a couple of times in a 4-year term. Sometimes it's even more than that. But you don't have a lot of lifetime achievement awards for press secretaries. It's one of those jobs, a little bit more of a short-term proposition for a good number of reasons. You sort of wonder. And listen, there's a chance Kirby Smart coaches Georgia for another 100 years, right? What else is he going to do? He's obviously driven towards success and competition. But the job is hard. It's a challenging job these days. And when Smart's talking about the monster in a way that Barry Switzer once did, at least makes you kind of think about, boy, what are we asking of these coaches in this era at this time? And, at what point in time does it just get to be too much? So we'll let Jake Fromm talk about that here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, hey, maybe what Kirby Smart needs, maybe he just needs a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Can you imagine Kirby on Utopia of the Seas or something like that, kicking back and relaxing? If he's never gotten the chance to experience, he should. He needs to experience Perfect Day Coco K is what he needs to experience. By the way, how good does Icon of the Seas look right there if you're watching on video? Icon's going to Perfect Day. Utopia's going to Perfect Day. Perfect Day Coco K is the unbelievable experience. It's the private island oasis, and I truly mean that. It's exclusively for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Get a chance to ride the tallest water slide in North America. Who wouldn't want to do that? That's the Thrill side. There's the Thrill Water Park there. It's got so many cool things to do. You've got the largest wave pool in the Bahamas there. You've got all kinds of water slides and things like that. Stuff for the kids, stuff for everybody in the whole family. If you're like, man, that's too adventurous for me. Well, listen, the chill side's perfect for you. You get the Oasis Lagoon pool. You get all the beach area. You've also got the brand new Hideaway Beach, which is the exclusive adults-only enclave. There's just so many amazing things that makes Perfect Day Coco K an absolute must-experience situation. I hope you'll check it out. Jessica Slater's a wonderful travel agent. She can tell you about how to do all of that. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you all about everything you need to know about that. And hope to see you in April with us at Perfect Day Coco K as a part of our Dog Nation cruise. Or maybe before that. Obviously, I want to be there as much as I possibly can be. So let's talk here for a moment as we go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, about a major change coming to college football. And total confession here, I don't quite know yet what the impact on this is going to be. So it was announced yesterday that the National Letter of Intent is going away. Sometimes the National Letter of Intent is called an NLI. Now, what makes things confusing is that NLI has got nothing to do with NIL, although I'm sure guys, whether they're supposed to or not, have gotten some NIL for their NLI. Either way, the NLI, the National Letter of Intent, is going away. And I think from the player perspective, I think that there was growing skepticism about what they were signing when they signed away their name on this thing, binding themselves to a school. I think the nature of that contract was becoming somewhat unpopular with some players. You had already heard of, this goes all the way back to like Roquan Smith, who never signed an NLI. You never had to sign a letter of intent to come to college, but it was just sort of the tradition that you would. And so now there's going to be, different papers. Frankly, you're going to probably be signing an agreement with your collective. You'll probably, in some cases, be signing away your NIL rights to the school that you're going to play at in exchange for compensation. That's probably coming. Hopefully the athletes read the fine print on that. But either way, there'll still be things to sign. There's obviously what they call grant in aid paperwork, which has to do with how you get paid to go to school. But there's just no more National Letter of Intent. But honestly, we're all somewhat self-interested. The selfish thing for me on this is it sounds like maybe it's better for the players not to have the letter of intent. So if so, more power to them. But I do worry about what we're going to do about all of this. And by we, I mean fans and media and someone like me who's sort of one foot in the fan world and one foot in the media world. This is going to make our lives incredibly complicated. At least it seems like it is. Because National Signing Day, whether it be the old school February thing or what has essentially become the real signing day on the first day of the early signing period, the tradition is that once Georgia gets, and they used to be faxes, now a fax is basically the same thing as, something digital. But the point is when the letter of intent got faxed in, well, Georgia would officially announce the signee. And it's always been fun when, so-and-so's letter hasn't come in. So therefore, there's drama. We're not going to have that anymore because they're not signing letters of intent. Like, how are we going to know that somebody's actually going to so-and-so school? Like what is going to be the official announcement now? I honestly don't know, and I'm sure we'll get clarity on this at some point in time. But the real impact here, I don't think it's going to change all that much for the players. I really don't. But it's going to change things a lot for us because what counts as an official signing, the thing that would have counted them as a signee before, well, now they're not signing that thing anymore. So what's this going to do to signing day? Like I'm being completely serious here. Like signing day is an institution, and I don't quite know how that's going to work this year. There's nothing to sign. So I don't know. Could get interesting. We'll have to follow that and see where it goes. Let me give you a prediction here for a moment. I'm really excited about this weekend slate of games. I think they're going to be outstanding. Perhaps one of the best is outside the SEC, where Oregon's going to host Ohio State. Now, my prediction in this game is Buckeyes big. I'm going to tell you why. I think an easy schedule is a weapon. That when you're not having to expend a lot of energy on a week-to-week basis, energy is a finite resource. When you're not having to give away a lot of energy week to week, you have a lot more energy to give to like the one or two games that really matter. And for Ohio State this year, for as long as this schedule's been printed, they have known their road trip to Oregon was essentially one of the two biggest regular season games they'll play for the entirety of the year. My expectation is because they haven't been challenged by their schedule, they'll be ready for it. If they're going to spend $20 million on their roster, they're certainly not going to get caught sleeping going to Eugene, Oregon, which is obviously a reputation to be a tough place to play. So I think that Ohio State probably enters itself into the college football conversation on Saturday, and goodness knows how much hype they'll get after that from the media that seems to hype the Buckeyes no matter what. But let me take this prediction one step further. Not only do I think the Buckeyes win big on Saturday, when the weekend is done, I believe we're going to have a brand new Heisman Trophy contender. I think it may be worth, if you're interested in this sort of thing, shopping around right now before the game against Oregon for some Heisman odds on Jeremiah Smith, the freshman wide receiver for the Buckeyes. The reason why I feel that way is because all the major championship contenders are going to have some sort of name show up in some regard around the Heisman conversation. But at a place like Ohio State, the quarterback ain't it. And you've got a couple of running backs there splitting some time here a little bit. But to be frank, right now, Smith is not only playing as one of the best freshmen in America, he's playing as one of the best players in the entire country here right now. And I do believe he's the best player on the field for either team coming up on Saturday. And if Ohio State does coast to what I think will be a fairly convincing win, I don't take pleasure in saying that because I like Dan Lanning. I think Dan Lanning's the best up-and-coming coach in college football. But Lanning still doesn't really have a signature win of note. And we haven't seen anything from Oregon, for my money, one of the most disappointing teams in America to this point. We haven't seen anything from Oregon as of yet that will lead you to believe that Saturday's their big breakout game. Success leaves clues. They haven't really been dropping very many hints. So Saturday, to me, feels all about Ohio State on the road, getting a big win. And I think the most likely culprit to provide that win is probably Jeremiah Smith. So in a game that a lot of people are going to be watching, if Smith is the obvious best player, despite the fact that he's a wide receiver, you don't typically give wide receivers a lot of Heisman love, although we saw Devontae Smith win it a couple of years ago. And despite the fact that he's only a freshman, which we've seen, freshmen get Heisman attention before too, I think that Jeremiah Smith will be the story of this game on Saturday and will be a very, very talked about possible Heisman winner on the other side of this game. Watch and see if that doesn't happen. Now, another big game on Saturday. We talked before about Oklahoma and Texas. So here's what I'm interested in for Saturday, starting with Georgia. Georgia's like a 30-whatever point favorite, depending on where you see it and when you see it. And frankly, I don't quite know that Georgia's going to cover that big of a number here in this game. And frankly, I'd be curious to know what the biggest margin of victory for any SEC team is in an SEC game thus far this year. Maybe Georgia gets it on Saturday, but even Texas, who played Mississippi State already, they failed to cover that number there in that spot. Perhaps Georgia does too. But let me tell you what I'd love to see. Even if Georgia doesn't cover the 32, 33-point spread, I'd love to see them be up big at the half. Wouldn't that feel like, we said last week, hey, relatively realistic level of expectation. It'd be nice if Georgia scored a touchdown in all four quarters, and they did. For me, Saturday, the sort of next step in this progression of getting a little bit better week in, week out, it'd be nice if Georgia was up 20 at the half. Wouldn't that be kind of nice? 21-0, 24-3, 23-0. Like, it'd be nice to see Georgia up 20 at the half. I think that'd be kind of nice. Because if you're up 20 at the half, you can rest Carson Beck. Rumors out there about that. You can sort of get some more snaps for some guys that maybe you hadn't got a chance to get as many snaps for here right now. You can do all that. And perhaps, you'll be just lucky enough to also have a situation where Texas, having to play a rivalry game, the SEC either accidentally or intentionally gave the Longhorns what appears to be a pretty favorable schedule. Playing Oklahoma the week before playing Georgia, we would acknowledge, is not exactly a break for the Longhorns. So can Oklahoma do a Georgia a favor here this week? I mean, Oklahoma's not been good this year at all, but typically pretty good against Texas. Can they go out there and play 60 minutes of football against the Longhorns, even if they lose? Can they cover the 14-point spread? Can they keep it close? Force Oklahoma to show some stuff on film? Force Texas to show some stuff on film? Force Texas to play its starters for the full game? Forcing Texas to sort of give it its all in a rivalry game, which, by the way, they lost a year ago, only regular season loss. Can Oklahoma be that good again on Saturday? What kind of favor would that be for UGA if that's the case? Especially, as I said before, if the Dogs build a 3-touchdown lead in the first half, have a chance to coast somewhat in the second half, that could be pretty advantageous for UGA on Saturday. We'll see if it plays out that way. I was going to do a couple other stories. Y'all, we're running pretty late here. I was going to mention something on Vanderbilt, Kentucky. I think that's a fun game. We'll try to do that tomorrow. Malachi Moore has apologized for his outburst there on Saturday. I would say all ought to be forgiven on that. He seems fairly contrite. That's fine. I don't know that means all the problems are solved in Tuscaloosa, but he seems fairly contrite. We're going to do more stories, but I'm kind of running out of time here a little bit. Instead, let me get you ready for really good conversation. We told you earlier we'd kind of get into the future for Kirby Smart, but also a lot of other things. Let's do a Kroger Fresh Take as we say hello to Jake Fromm here right now. And here on Dawgnation Daily, time now for a Kroger Fresh Take as we bring in the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm to the program. Always fun to have Jake here. Perhaps not as much fun, at least in one of the topics here today. But Jake, I guess we'll deal with some of the Cobie Young situation here. We're recording this on a Wednesday. That means just about an hour or so ago, we found out that Young was suspended indefinitely as his legal process sort of plays itself out here. I guess to sort of start with a broad question, I want to ask you something more specific. I mean, as a former Georgia player who kind of knows that locker room culture, kind of knows what it's like to be around the program, what is your reaction to sort of another issue related to this for Georgia here right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's just terrible, so unfortunate. It really just breaks my heart, and I don't know all the specifics about what went down and this and that. Just obviously know, he got arrested, and man, it really breaks my heart. And I heard Champ Bailey talking on this subject, and I think he was really spot on about this. It's like, Kirby is doing everything he can possibly do to create a good culture, a competitive culture that wins football games, but a culture that cultivates young boys into good, solid men. Yeah. And I know he's doing that. And I know he's doing more now than he ever did, especially when he first started with us. Man, they have these special times that they have, meeting times set away to develop relationships with each other. And then also learn how to be good young men. So I know Kirby is doing everything he can possibly do. And I think Champ was spot on about this. And he says, man, at some point, these young men have to take responsibility and accountability for their own actions. I think that's kind of a lost art in the world today of just being able to take responsibility for your life, for your action and what's going on in your life. And man, it breaks my heart. And I think we need not only I think it's bigger than what's going on in the locker room at specifically Georgia. I think this is a bigger societal issue. And man, I really hate it.
No, I think that's well said, Jake. I do. And look, no one, for the most part, is going to feel sorry for Kirby Smart. He makes $100 million. He's very successful. He's kind of tough-minded. Smart seems to be a guy that's always in control. But at the same time, he has talked plenty about this and some other issues, perhaps somewhat less serious, as being real challenges and the kind of thing that might keep you up at night, the kind of thing that maybe makes the job not as much fun as it would have been maybe in the past, not the vision of college football he first had when he desired to become a coach. As someone who worked with him closely and probably had more than your own, share of sort of moments when you wanted to get some space from him maybe from time to time, but how do you think all of this weighs on Kirby? What do you think that his kind of like private feeling is about the way in which he's just constantly facing these seemingly unique challenges of leadership?
Yeah, he's so hard on his guys, his players, his coaches, because he's built a very strong relationship with them. He cares during recruiting. He is one of the best at it, of really developing genuine relationships. And so when you walk on day one on campus, onto that practice field, like he can already coach you to a level, because there's a level of understanding and a level of care that you guys have already built through a relationship, through recruiting, and through your time there. So this is a guy who really genuinely cares, obviously about this program, about this university, but really about his players as well. So I know it weighs heavy on him. It keeps him up at night. He absolutely hates it, and he wants nothing but the best from his players and wants them to go on and move on and be great, successful men that contribute to society. So I know this really hurts him, weighs heavy on him, and man, I hate it for all parties involved.
Let me ask you a question you don't know the answer to. When it comes to player discipline issues, or when it comes to how you manage a transfer portal that's also concurrent to the college football playoff, and how you manage NIL and the changes coming there, is this a job you can do for 20 years anymore? When I was a kid, Vince Dooley was the Georgia coach for 25 years. Kirby Smart, when he first took the job, obviously your first season was his second year at Georgia. The thought was, gosh, this guy may be the coach of Georgia for the rest of his life, and maybe he will be. But when you think about how he approaches every challenge with the intensity that he does, how significant those challenges seem to get, can you do this job for 20 years anymore?
Personally, I don't know how you do. It's turned into a full-on sprint and how long can you sprint? I have no idea. Nick Saban just retired. To me, in my head, he was the last guy to really have that marathon of, hey, I'm coming in, building a culture of winning, and building on some very good core principles. And obviously Kirby has learned from the best, learned from him, and trying to implement that. But man, this new thing, this transfer portal, this NIL, it is a sprint from year to year, because you don't have that same ability to cultivate a culture and have guys in and know you're going to have those guys for 4, maybe 5 years. It is different. The landscape has changed. Would I want Kirby Smart to be the head coach at the University of Georgia for the next 20, 30 years? Yes, absolutely. I don't think there's a better guy for the job. But in all, realistic, probability, I really don't know how much longer he can do this and sustain at the level he's doing, because man, it is a tough deal. And this is a sprint, and it is full on pedal to the metal sprint.
So obviously, whatever the allegation is against Cobie Young is potentially more serious than anything related to football. I totally understand that. Yet we're also kind of a football show. That's the topic we're probably more comfortable discussing. So with Young now suspended for an indefinite period of time, with Ra Thomas no longer on this team, with the fact that you had to begin the year knowing you were going to replace a guy like Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers is essentially a wide receiver in terms of how he functioned with the Georgia offense. Does there come a point, Jake, where the talent level of your wide receiver room is just too depleted, and now you are undeniably less than what you otherwise could have been?
Yeah, so on the topic of the transfer portal and NIL, saw a press interview from Matt Rule, head coach at Nebraska, and he was spot on with it as well. When you're going through your recruiting cycles and trying to recruit a class, these good core role players that you would normally get at a place like Alabama or UGA, you're not getting anymore, because these guys are they're collecting, paychecks from maybe more middle of the road, middle tier programs, and they're getting the opportunity to play. And so you're not as deep with depth with good players as you used to be. So this is going to be a challenge for that room specifically moving forward. It's going to be a challenge for Carson. Colbie Young turned into a guy that obviously, you could tell watching on Saturdays that Carson really liked and relied on through that last fade ball to Cobie Young at the end of the Alabama game, because he trusted him to go up and make a play. And now that guy's not out there on the field. So just going to be next man up, and we'll see what that looks like moving forward. But it's in the world that we're in today with these programs, they're just not as deep as they used to be.
I want to finish by asking a question about the Georgia offense in a moment. Before that, let me remind folks, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on Dawgnation Daily. We're coming up one I think is a really great time of year with our friends at Kroger. That is the Halloween candy is out. You love that. You go there, middle of the store, they got all the candy. You want the big bars, you want the little snack packs, everything else in between, all the good stuff. Love this time of year. For our family, a huge ritual every single year is going to Kroger and get stocked up on the decorations and all the good stuff to make Halloween a really fun time with your family and friends and everybody there in your neighborhood. And one of the great ways to take advantage of that is become a Kroger Boost member. You can have the candy delivered to your home. You don't have to go get it. They'll bring it to you. Or as you're going to take advantage of that, the stuff that you're already buying to make Halloween and all the other special days a lot of fun. You get twice the fuel points for every dollar you spend on the stuff that you're already buying at your local Kroger. So you can go in store, find out more, but you can also become a Kroger Boost member by checking out Kroger.com/boost for more on that. It's Kroger.com/boost for more on that today. All right, Jake, to finish things up. So obviously not even probably a perfect game offensive from Georgia on Saturday, but they did score a touchdown in every quarter. You kind of got the running game going in a way it probably has not thus far this year. Trevor Etienne's probably best game as a dog, I thought. Did you think that Georgia got better on that side of the ball on Saturday?
Yeah, I did. This game, watching it with my eyes, to me was closer than maybe what the scoreboard indicated. I think yardage-wise, both these teams very similar. We gave up over 130 rushing yards on defense. I just think we're missing that dominance at the line of scrimmage on offense and on defense that we're just used to seeing. Like then again, the expectation has been set so astronomically high for this team. Reminds me maybe a lot of maybe 2018, 2019 for myself, with those teams coming off, that national championship appearance. And man, it is tough to meet that level of expectation standard week in and week out, especially with the new landscape of college football. But I think I'm encouraged moving forward of what the offensive game plan looks like. I think they are really starting to kind of hit their midseason stride and figure out who are the guys we can rely on to go make a play. Love ETN, love Nate Frazier in the running game, but we were a little banged up at the offensive line position, and I just want to see a little bit more dominance. A little bit, hey, we're going to run the football. You know it, we know it, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Man, when I see that, I'll know that we'll be very successful moving into the later part of the year.
Checking in from the Lions facility. You look good with that Aloha blue on there. Always happy to see that, Jake. By the way, congratulations. Detroit's also off to a great start here this season there as well. Thank you for your time on the Kroger Fresh Take here today. We'll look forward to seeing you back here on Dawgnation Daily very soon again as well. No doubt Jake's organization, the Detroit Lions, making quite a splash around the NFL here at the moment. And speaking of making a splash, you can make a splash as well in a brand new pool from our friends at White's Pools, a part of our great Dawgnation Game Day coverage. And I'm very proud to have them here on Dawgnation Daily there as well. A family-owned business, fourth generation now of taking care of folks when it comes to gorgeous swimming pools, including if you're watching a video. How great does all of that look right there? They specialize in custom in-ground pools, cleaning service. They got repair and water testing there for you there as well. Obviously, they've done great work for Coach Rick. That means they can do great work for you there, too. They've been recognized as a premier builder. They won second place, believe it or not, in the International Building Design Awards, obviously a very prestigious thing. And they even put a custom pool in Mark Rick's home there, too. So they can do that for you as well. They got 2 retail locations in Watkinsville and in Loganville. So make sure you check them out. Plus, they offer free Aquarite salt system on new construction products. You can find them online, and you can book your consultation to talk about getting your own custom pool made today. It's whitespools.com. That's WHITES, whitespools.com for more on that. So for our golden shoe today, our buddy Wyatt Fielden shouting out the Georgia volleyball team. Now, admittedly, we probably don't talk very much volleyball around here. I, unfortunately, don't always know a lot about some of the other sports necessarily, but it's amazing how popular college athletics is in areas beyond just football right now. And obviously around Georgia, lots of examples of that. Volleyball team calling for 10,000 fans this weekend for what they're calling 10K Day. Wyatt Fielden reaching out to say, everybody show up and be loud for UGA volleyball, shouting out the fact that Georgia Bulldogs are challenging folks to set the Georgia State attendance record for an NCAA volleyball match this Friday against South Carolina. Going to be giveaways, a block party, so much more. I'll even give a free plug for it. GeorgiaDawgs.com, that's the website. You can be there and be a part of it. We'll kind of throw our weight behind folks showing up for the volleyball team there against South Carolina this weekend. Lousy, stinking Gators. No records being set for them right now other than those for ineptitude. 1,433 days. That's how long it's been since the lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. And that, my friends, is great news. It's our Gator Hater Updater. We'll see you back here tomorrow at Dawgnation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. All right, let's roll through some comments on YouTube here for a moment. G. Gray says that Dan Jackson's going to get drafted. He doesn't take plays off. I certainly think that Dan Jackson's got a really good chance of playing in the NFL. Now, who gets drafted as a late-round pick and who doesn't, sometimes that seems to be a little hard for me to sort of sift through. But what people don't realize about Jackson is he runs really well. I mean, he's a good runner. And obviously, that's kind of a prerequisite for getting the attention of the NFL scouts, but I think he does. And here's what I'll also say. Dan Jackson's just a good player, full stop. But I think that some Georgia fans have the assumption, I'm not picking on this is just sort of the nature of the beast. Some Georgia fans have this assumption, well, Georgia ought to be able to have a better player than Dan Jackson because sort of all they know is his recruiting profile. And frankly, I didn't know this until this week, that unlike, say, a preferred walk-on that Georgia recruits, they say, hey, we don't have a scholarship for you, but you can come here and be a walk-on. We think you have a chance to play eventually. In the case of Jackson, he's just a student. Like, he went to school at Georgia, called Kirby Smart and said, hey, can I play football? In a lot of ways, of all the crazy stories we've heard of, like, how guys ended up at Georgia, like, pound for pound, that's about as crazy as anything. But the point is, because of that background and perhaps other things that, caused him to be, slighted, I think people assume that Georgia ought to have a better player than Dan Jackson. But that is, as I said before, an example of people underrating the kind of player that Jackson is. But in addition to that, Dan Jackson, to me, is also an example of what college football is going to be going forward. This is going to become, for better or worse, something that feels an awful lot like more of a salary cap type sport, the way the NFL is, where some of your most important players are the guys that are doing big things on a relatively cheap deal. That's just the way the NFL is that there was actually a story about this with the Chiefs the other day. If you really are into the NFL, look at how many guys the Chiefs have that are like cast-offs that they then saw get casted off from another team, and they kind of brought them back. I mean, I hate to say this, but McCole Hardman's a little bit like that. Guys that anybody could have had, the Chiefs said, okay, we'll bring you back on a deal that's favorable to us from a salary cap standpoint, and you'll thrive here, and then maybe you can go get paid somewhere else. Like, the Chiefs are like the masters at that because they have to pay Patrick Mahomes so much money. In one way or another, this is the thing that you are going to be in college football going forward, that you're either going to have, I said this the other day, you're either going to have a Diego Pavia quarterback or you're going to have a Nico Iamaleava quarterback. And if you got a Nico quarterback, that means you're going to have a lot more players like Dan Jackson, as a part of your starting lineup. And if you want more of a Diego Pavia-style quarterback, okay, well, now you got more money to sort of get the Caleb Downs if that's what you want to have or something like that. But one way or another, whether it's officially called a salary cap or not, everybody has a budget constraint. And how you choose to use that budget is going to matter. Do you want the big-dollar quarterback? Well, if so, then you've got to be about similar to the Chiefs and find your cast-off other places. And sort of make do with lesser-priced talents in other spots. Chiefs do that at wide receiver. But if you want the sort of Brock Purdy-style quarterback, the effective quarterback on a team-friendly deal, well, now you've got more money to spend on other players. But no one's got infinite dollars to spend on every position. No one does. No one does. And so that's a thing to consider going forward, that not only is Georgia lucky to have a guy like Dan Jackson right now, they better have themselves some Dan Jacksons going forward, because you're not going to be able to afford to pay a roster full of 5 stars. You're just not going to be able to. Paul Moon says, my only thing for London Humphreys taking over Cobie Young is he's got 15 pounds on him. Yeah, as we said before, I think of London Humphreys and Cobie Young as two completely different players. But if we think about this in the realm of, well, who can just give you touches and give you effective play? I mean, clearly Humphreys was effective against Clemson. So at least in terms of the overall stat sheet, the overall production, that Humphreys might help fill some of that void, even if he's not taking the same kinds of snaps that Cobie Young would have been taking. Green Soldier says he thinks that London is better for what Georgia needs. Mike says, I wonder if our replacement plan for Young is going to get shown on Saturday, if we're going to wait for Texas. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously two schools of thoughts around that. We talked to Jake Fromm about this the other day, about what you do to sort of hold stuff back from the game that matters most. You'd presume that Texas is trying to do the same thing. Sarkisian's a very sharp offensive mind, of course. But there's also the situation of, I got to get guys ready for that game. So if you're going to ask more from a player than you've asked in the past, you almost need to ask that from him prior to the big game against Texas. So the element of surprise has some value, and I'm sure that Georgia probably has some surprises in store for Texas. The element of surprise has some value, but the element of preparation, I'm guessing, probably has even greater value. And so if Georgia's going to put players into bigger roles they've been before, my guess is they probably try to do that some this week so that they're ready for Texas. If I had to guess, that's what I would say. Let's Go Dog says, what if Texas beats us but then loses to Vanderbilt? What would that say more about Vandy or UGA? I may do this for a golden shoe tomorrow. Somebody sent me a funny thing about I don't want to spoil the joke, but somebody sent me a joke similar to that for a golden shoe. I'm going to show that to you tomorrow. G. Gray says that Nico's the most talented quarterback in college football. It's his first year. But, G, you know this. It's not his first year. It's his second year. It's his first year starting, but it's his second year on campus. And I'm not trying to overstate this, but right now Nico is nothing special at quarterback. And maybe next year he will be. Maybe by the end of this year he'll be more of that. But Nico's not having a great year. I said this earlier this week. Right now, if I had one game to win, I'd rather have Diego Pavia than Nico Iamaleava. I don't care how talented he is. He's only been okay. He had every chance to put his fingerprints on the game against Arkansas last week, and he didn't. And I say that as someone who has, by and large, been pretty positive about Tennessee this year. I think Tennessee's a pretty good team. But we've been saying this week to week. I think people assume that Tennessee's ascension in the rankings prior to its loss was propelled by the high-powered quarterback like Nico Iamaleava. And it just ain't, to use bad grammar intentionally. And look, in a day and age in which you're paying guys allegedly millions of dollars, this idea of, he's only a sophomore, I don't know that you get there. I really don't think you can get there on that. I'm not telling you he's a bust. He's far from that. If he's starting for a team like this, he's at least showing some capability. But he's not lighting the world on fire right now. He's not. He's not. And given the price tag NIL-wise, that feels like less than full value. Alan Hampton says he's playing less than average. I would say he's playing no better than average for the most part. This is a good question. Garrison Tucker says, hey, what's more dangerous to the Georgia defense? The combination of Ewers and Bond or the combination of Williams and Milroe? So I think Williams is a better receiver than Isaiah Bond. I don't think there's any doubt about that to me. I think that Williams is the better receiver. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens at quarterback for Texas on Saturday. There is some chatter that Quinn Ewers might be back. Because keep in mind, it's been Arch Manning playing the last couple of weeks. There is some chatter that Ewers is coming back. I think some of the belief in Austin is they like to have Ewers for Georgia. So once again, to go back to what somebody said before, surprise versus preparation. Do they want Ewers to play on Saturday to sort of work him back in? Do they believe they can beat Texas? Does Texas believe they can beat Oklahoma without him? Is he just fully healthy, so now you might as well let him go? Or is he not healthy yet, and maybe that also lingers? The status, in other words, of Ewers is still pretty questionable because they haven't really revealed a whole lot about his situation, although it seems like he is getting healthier. And look, it's like Georgia has just had its issues with Jalen Milroe, but once you kind of got past that early flurry to begin the game, which it counts, you can't whitewash it. The truth is, Milroe hasn't really been that good since then. I still sort of feel like I don't quite know what Milroe is as a quarterback, but it certainly seems like Georgia's had very, very bad game plans against him. Very different kinds of game plans, but both of them pretty ineffective a couple of different times here. Foster Moss says Ewers got the same injury that JT Daniels had, and he won't be right if he plays us and takes a few hits. You could be right about that. I've predicted all along that I thought that Arch Manning would have a role against Georgia, and I still think he probably will, even if Ewers is healthy. KC says if Vandy does beat Texas, it says something about them in the SEC. Well, it clearly would. I don't quite know if they're going to do that, but I think this Saturday, this is one of the things I wanted to talk about during the regular show, just didn't have time to today. This Saturday, Vanderbilt plays at Kentucky. Vandy's about a little bit more than a 2-touchdown underdog in that game. But I think they'll at least play it close. I think some of what you saw from Vanderbilt last Saturday was kind of real. Now, they also lost to Georgia State earlier this year. But I think some of that was a little bit of moxie from Vandy. Now, I also think it certainly looked like poor preparation from Alabama. But there's a little something going on with Vandy here right now. As you can probably tell, I clearly like their quarterback. So yeah. Lesko says he hopes that C.J. Wiley flips to UGA. Boy, I do too. Jeff, by the way, had an interview with C.J. Wiley last night. DT says even Isaiah Bond thinks Ryan Williams is the better receiver. Hence, that's why he went to Alabama. Why he went to Texas. Could be very true. Let's see what else. JP says he thinks the changes in the sport are going to cause it kind of to revert back to the old way because development's going to be very important again. He says if the NFL is still the ultimate goal, you can only make so much in college, then the coaches that develop the best may be the most important of the top-end talent. Yeah, you're just going to have to try to maximize, look, the easiest thing in the world to do is go out and get like a five-star level player. The talent is the real commodity, but we're already seeing a little bit of more of a equal dispersion of those top players than we've seen in the past. Everyone's having to find out more about their depth than they used to before. I mean, look at Georgia on Saturday and this past Saturday, and for all intents and purposes, it seems like Drew Bobo had a pretty good game. But, I mean, Drew Bobo is your starting center right now. At least he was on Saturday because your real guy got hurt. Your backup center was a converted guard. He got hurt too. This is the sort of thing that happens in the NFL all the time, where you just sort of have to throw a guy out there and hope he goes out there and does a job and, holds up because he's supposed to be a professional. Like, we have never asked college kids to be that way. We've brought them along slowly, to go back to what G. Grace was saying about Nico. In the past, we've kind of brought college kids along slowly. We sort of spoon feed them a little bit at a time. We're just not doing that anymore. There's just less of that because of the challenge of some of these rosters. Savannah Bryan says Dogs need confidence building win of this weekend and forget that there's a bye after the Texas game. Yeah, there you go. We've talked before about Georgia's issues going into a bye, although I don't think that'll be probably a problem getting ready for Texas. Senior Dog 54 talking about some of Georgia's issues when it comes to running plays. He says we're 3 yards better than the last place team in rushing yards per game. So a lot of that's because coming into last week, Georgia was next to last in the SEC in rushing carries per game, among the lowest in the country in terms of rushing attempts per game. So we saw some steps taken to change that last week. I do believe they want to eventually make a concerted effort to run it more. I believe you'll probably see that. But that's also going to put more stress on the offensive line, too. Scott Harris says my best memory of Dan Jackson when he got decleated in our pick six in the national title. Yeah, talk about a guy who, and Kirby praised him this week, put his body on the line in a moment that mattered as much as anything ever could. You're absolutely right about that. Over on Facebook for a moment. Marshall Fleming and Joseph Kennedy talking about London Humphreys. William Camacho says, my Sooners have owned as he calls them, the Shorthorns for a long time now and will continue. Expecting Oklahoma to play well on Saturday. Gary Holt checking out. Gary, we appreciate you being here. Joseph Kennedy says of the Georgia wide receivers, only Bell and Lovett are proven. The rest are suspect. It's clearly a work in progress. And listen, I hate to say this, y'all, but we did talk about this right before the season began. That a lot of chatter about a lot of position groups for Georgia, conspicuously quiet when it came to the wide receiver position. When there is good news to report, it typically leaks out, and it did not leak out about receivers before the season began. You can't help but notice that. Bill Sanders says, so if the Sooners knock out Arch and Ewers is still hurt, who will play against us? Yeah, obviously the former, they had 3 good quarterbacks a year ago. The other guy is now the starting quarterback at Duke. What was his name? Why am I blanking on his name? He's at Duke now, and he's starting. So they had They had 3 really good quarterbacks a year ago because Manning last year was just the third-string quarterback. Their other guy they liked a lot. He ended up going to Duke. So Marshall Fleming on the subject of London Humphreys, comparing him to Bell, saying he's much faster than Bell and 2 inches taller. Is he really 2 inches taller? He had a 25-foot long jump in track. That's Champ Bailey. He's probably faster than Arian Smith on the football field, but not in track. But London did run some 10.3 100 in high school. So that's a little bit bigger than I thought he was, and pretty good athletic credentials. That's a good point. And listen, here's the thing about London Humphreys. London Humphreys played a lot for Vanderbilt last year. And you said, well, it's only Vanderbilt. But that's SEC experience. He was one of the more experienced freshman receivers in the league last year. Let's see what else. Yeah, so a lot of love for London Humphrey in here today. Gary Holt on the subject of teams not being able to stack talent like they used to. I think that's just what college football is going to be now, which means, as I've said before, that's why I believe how you choose to allocate your NIL dollars is going to be really important. And to be good at what I call the premium positions, the positions that matter most, that's how you get roster value maximized. Quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, defensive line, edge rusher, cornerback. Those are the premium positions. Those are the positions that produce first-round draft picks most often. And making sure you've got your best players at the most important positions, I just think moving forward that's going to be critical. A Green Soldier says he thinks the sequencing for Georgia offensively is very, very bad. Could be the case. I guess I'll have to plead ignorance on that to a certain extent. But I certainly respect your opinion, Green Soldier, and you know football very well. All I can judge are the results. And as we said, like the one thing that if you want to look at a full season's worth of Monken in 2022 compared to a full season's worth of Bobo in 2023, points per game, yards per play, really pretty similar, both among the best in the country. You know, the Monken offenses seem to be slightly more explosive, about one additional play of 20 or more yards per 2 games played for Georgia during the Monken era, slightly more explosive. So the drive that everybody seemed to love against Auburn, and the one that Kirby Smart himself said some positive things about, was when it was 14-10 third quarter, when Auburn an inch closer, Georgia marches down the field, scores the touchdown to make it 21-10, and then sort of never look back. That drive had 2 plays of 20-plus yards. One of them was to Cobie Young. The other one was a big run to Trevor Etienne. So I won't pretend to be a judge of how well sequenced Georgia is in terms of what it's calling. But I do think if you want to see improvement, how many more of those 20-plus yard plays do you see? You know, back on the intermediate routes, the kinds of things that theoretically ought to be slightly more efficient than some of the heave and hope deep balls. You know, Trevor Etienne making a man miss. Nate Frazier playing more, him making a man miss. How many more of those 20-plus yard plays can you see? Georgia probably needs more of those right now. Let us get ready to go. We're going to have to wrap it up here. Getting late. On the subject of Michael Jackson, so of all the transfer receivers, I've never heard word one about Michael Jackson. Not positive, not negative, not anything in between. Never heard that. And it was so quiet during the offseason that Jackson was never a guy that I really anticipated being a big part of this offense right now, just because there's not much being said about him. You know, Humphreys had his admirers. Cobie Young definitely had his admirers as a player. But it's always been quiet around Jackson. To be fair to him, that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad, but good news typically leaks out. It just does. People like telling good stories. And so if there's good news, it typically leaks out. That's just kind of the way that it goes. So if it's really, really quiet about so-and-so, that's usually probably pretty telling. And it's just been very quiet about him. His moment may come. I'll give you a perfect example. For a long time, you didn't hear anything positive about Tyke Smith. And to be honest with you, the first year he was here, you probably heard behind the scenes that even pre-injury wasn't running very well, not what they thought they were getting. This was a guy who was not a Georgia-level player when he first came to Georgia, if we're just being honest. Now, we didn't talk about that on the show necessarily, but there was some chatter that Georgia wasn't super happy with what Tyke Smith was bringing to the table. And then he got hurt. Gosh, go back and look at him last year. This guy's playing a ton, locking down the star position in the NFL now. He really became something after, a pretty inauspicious start to his Georgia career. The same thing could be true for anybody else in their position. That sometimes, what's quiet to begin with turns into something later on. Now, honestly, I don't even know how much eligibility Michael Jackson still has at UGA. I honestly don't know, but assuming he's got more, he could be a Tyke Smith level player where, hey, maybe it's, really, really quiet in terms of the positive chatter when he first arrives, but kind of learns and grows into something over the course of his time here. Tyke definitely did that. He won those coaches over with the way that he worked and the way that he, contributed, and anybody else would have the same chance. But if it's quiet now on that front, and some of y'all travel in the rumor mills, you know what they are, and not a sound about that right now. That's probably pretty telling. DT says, I could handle being a press secretary for 10 years. I used to, if I had an alternate universe, career, being a press secretary or something like that, I'd kind of enjoy that. I think I'd kind of enjoy that. I don't know if I could do it for 10 years. I don't think anybody can do that for 10 years, but I'd kind of enjoy that. All right, we're going to go. Oh, Savannah Bryant coming to Athens for the first time this year on Saturday. Brian, that's great. If you get a chance, come see us at the UGA bookstore after the game. I'd love to say hello to you. We'd love to do that. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. This is about to get cool. It means your heating system about to be challenged. When you flip it on, is it going to work? You don't know. Maybe get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs so you can know for sure. Find them online, rsandrews.com on that. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Dawgnation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We will look forward to talking to you then.